Please listen carefully to the following emergency instructions for passengers. In the unlikely event of a serious emergency taking place, you will be advised by the master of the vessel or a member of the crew of the appropriate action to be taken. Please remain calm. Should it become necessary to abandon ship, you will be instructed to leave the compartment in which you are located using the nearest accessible and clearly marked exit. It may equally become necessary to enter the water. If so, hold one of the grab lines on a lifebuoy or float. Each lifeboat can support 2 persons and each float can support 20 persons. The vessel is additionally equipped with at least one self-inflating life raft capable of supporting 65 persons. A first aid kit is available for any minor accidents, and at least one trained first aider is on board the vessel at all times. Please also be aware that any form of smoking is not allowed on board the vessel. Rest assured you are in safe hands. Please relax and enjoy your trip along the River Dee. The following year he escaped from captivity and regathered his scattered forces, only to suffer another devastating defeat at the Battle of Waterloo. Naturally, Chester celebrated once more with yet another regatta. Cambridge held its first regatta in 1829, whilst Henley-on-Thames, generally regarded as Britain's principal international rowing event, only held its first regatta in 1839. For the moment, ladies and gentlemen, there will be a short break in the commentary until the commencement of the return part of the cruise, after which point some of the more interesting views from the river will be outlined, hopefully, for your further enjoyment. Of its historical importance. Since 1228 we've had a mayor, now we have a Lord Mayor. Just to the left of the cathedral, note the tall pointed tower standing high above Chester's Town Hall, seat of local government since it was built in 1869. Very much in the style of a French chateau, but surprisingly designed by a young Irishman, William of Belfast, when only 29 years of age. Still on the left-hand side, but sweeping well to the right, you will notice a tall chimney. This is Chester's lead shot tower. This tower was built in 1799 to provide lead shot, otherwise known as musket balls. primarily for use as ammunition in the Napoleonic Wars. Although a number of such towers were built at this time, Chester's Tower remains not only as the oldest of the 3 remaining towers in the UK, but as a reminder of those far-off days. I'm sure you will have noticed that for quite some time we've been travelling around a long bend in the river. In the 11th century, the land on the left-hand side was actually an island, known in those days as an eyot or eye, and was owned by the Norman earls. When the last earl died without an heir in 1237, the land passed to the crown and was eventually sold off. Today it's a water meadow prone to winter flooding, and just as in medieval times is still referred to as the Earl's Eye. Returning once more to the right-hand side, one can't help but notice the large castle-type building set back in the trees. It is known as Walmore Hill, and was originally built as the retirement home of a very famous Chester Victorian architect by the name of John Douglas. He was responsible for more than 400 buildings in and around the city, and was particularly noted for his splendid chimneys, some resembling sticks of barley sugar. By far his most famous piece of work is the marvellous wrought iron framework supporting Chester's beautiful clock astride the Eastgate, a symbol of Chester throughout the world. Building work started on Walmore Hill in 1898, but unfortunately was still not quite finished by the time of John Douglas's death in 1911. This particular stretch of the river is known as Dee Ford, and was the site of a Roman ford way back in the 1st century AD. It's quite shallow here even today, and it's still possible to walk across at this point without getting one's hair wet. Now in view on the right-hand side is a splendid 19th century cream building with a red roof. Once the residence of a wealthy Victorian family, it is now divided into self-contained apartments. Many of the buildings from this point on were constructed around the mid-19th century, in most cases for the well-to-do people of the day. The railways came to Chester in the 1840s and tourism started to boom. The city also became a fashionable centre for the rich and famous, many of whom chose to build their houses in the suburbs. This particular area, known as Borden, approximately 1 mile from the city centre, was just one of them. Today, many of the buildings have been split into apartments or taken over by various business concerns. This suburb was also very significant 2,000 years ago. The Romans of the day discovered natural water springs in the vicinity and pumped their supplies into the city by means of lead pipe in a cultivated area known as Hangman's Hill. This was the place where such executions were carried out. A little known fact is that 15% of those executed were actually men. It is still consecrated land and is unlikely to be built upon in the foreseeable future. From the 13th to the 17th century, some 300,000 unfortunates suffered similar deaths throughout Europe. The last such trials in England were in 1712. For many years this was also the site of more general public executions, the last one being in 1801, when John Clare, a young man in his 20s, was convicted of stealing and brought here in chains to await hanging. Having escaped from custody, he then drowned trying to swim across the river to safety. Nonetheless, he was dragged from the river and hanged anyway. The whole gory process took well over an hour and caused such revulsion that public executions on this spot stopped forthwith. However, they still continued elsewhere in the city until 1866, and in Britain as a whole stopped completely 2 years later in 1868. Just ahead on the right-hand side, and partially hidden by the huge trees, look out for a very tall red brick building, in appearance just like a fairy tale castle. This was once the home of the author Thomas Hughes, who amongst other literary works wrote Tom Brown's School Days. Published in 1856, it recounted some of his experiences at Rugby School. As a member of the legal profession, he moved to Chester in 1882 as a county court judge, and had this beautiful mansion built overlooking the river, where he lived until his death in 1896. Hoffington House was named after the town in Berkshire, where he was born in 1822. Now look out for what appear to be some lovely Georgian buildings on the right-hand side. Known as Diva Terrace, they were actually built by the Victorians. Dee was the name given to the city 2,000 years ago by the Romans in honour of the Celtic goddess of this very same River Dee on which you are now sailing. We now come to Grosvenor Park on the right-hand side. This 20-acre plot of land was given to the people of Chester in the 1860s by Richard Grosvenor, the second Marquess of Westminster. I'm sure that many of you will be surprised to know that the very first public park in the world, the city's university complex. Its reputation as a distinguished training college since 1839 led to university status being granted in 2005. In the distance, note the old Dee Bridge. Built in the 14th century, it replaced a number of partly wooden structures washed away in high floods and tides. There is recent archaeological evidence that parts of its base on the downstream side are of Roman origin. A tower on the left-hand side was demolished in the 1780s. In 1826, the structure was widened for pedestrian traffic, and in 1886, tolls were finally abolished. Just before the bridge is the weir. Built by the Norman Earls of Chester in the 11th century, it served two main purposes. Firstly, to keep a constant depth of water above the weir, and secondly, to provide water power for their corn mills, situated along the right-hand side of the river, just beyond the bridge. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for. On behalf of Chester Boat, I would like to thank you all for sailing with us today. If you have enjoyed the cruise and commentary, then why not tell your friends? And if possible, please let us know on Chester Boat's social media channels. I also hope that you continue to enjoy the rest of your stay in Chester. On a final note, could I please ask you all to remain seated until the vessel is firmly and safely tied up on the landing stage.